Chen, and welcome to my channel. It is food for HNM. I'm a real person. Let me show you. There's my face. I have hair. Hello. Let me tell you a joke. Why did the chicken cross the road to get to the McDonald's? Ha ha! See, if I was a what do you call it? A CGI'd you know, artificially generated with computer graphics person, I wouldn't be able to do that. Tell you a joke and be that wacky. No. Computer can't do that. Alright, so we are continuing with 1 Samuel 18. So let's see what it is titled. Saul's growing fear of David. After David had finished talking with Saul. Remember, David had just finished defeating a giant. Jonathan, that is Saul's son, his son, became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. So Jonathan sounds gay. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. According to the Bible, you are supposed to love your spouse, your wife, as yourself. Jonathan, or your neighbor. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. But let me stop there. I sense questions, because some of you are younger. The way I understand it to work is if someone is gay and you are not gay, do not punch, no punching. You just say something like, thank you, but I am not gay. And if a neighbor, the Lord wants you to treat others as you would want them to treat you. So love God and love your neighbor. But it depends, how one person wants to treat another. Sometimes you have to say no, I cannot accept that, And some things you say, yes, yes, I can accept that. But when you love your neighbor, do not stop, do not stop being someone's neighbor and allow them to be your neighbor. Do not hate them, and you can give stuff to them, treat them pretty well. I hope that makes sense. So David was successful. And when he was a high-ranking officer, it pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. So we can see that besides success in fighting, there's this new word, high rank. Rank sometimes means smell, a high smell. No, a rank is now Saul or David or maybe Jonathan, they created what we have today. We have lieutenants, we have captains, we have something like a colonel, and then we have generals, right? So we are introduced because remember, things change and they get better and they become more developed. So in the past, there was someone named Yehoshua. He was the general. But I said he had something like homie managers, He had his friends that he trusted. And he just made them something. I said he made them his captains and colonels. But that was not the name for them. They called them like the leaders of 50s, the leaders of 100s, the leaders of 500s. Those were the actual names of what we have now, ranks, So I think when David was fighting for Saul, now they had something called like lieutenants, captains, and colonels and generals. Because remember, there are different kinds of generals. There's the 1-star general, 2-star general, 3 and 4-star generals. But the 5-star general, he is a very, how should I say it? During wartime, when you're warring, like the United States warred against the Germans a long, long time ago. It was very serious battling. World War II, it is like a lot of fighting for a very long time, and many people were dying, during like a big war. One called World War II, the world, the planet, War II, when it is a very large and serious war. That is when you have a 5-star general. So let's continue with verse 6. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, that's Goliath, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul was very angry. This refrain is, what I just read. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. This refrain displeased him greatly. He didn't when he heard that, he was angry. He was not pleased. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands? What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. So remember, prophesying is singing, and you're somehow telling the future. You're speaking, and maybe you're singing and rapping. You're singing, but you're also talking. And then somehow you're telling the future. So he's singing and David is playing. As he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But this pinning is he's going to he'll throw the spear and it will hit David and go through his body and then into the wall and through the wall. So he wanted to kill David by throwing a spear through him and into the wall. So Saul is still a strong person. He can, if you see a guy there near the wall, how strong must the guy be if he could throw a spear into the guy and into the wall, pin him to the wall. But David eluded him twice. So David just, he just dodged it. So twice. Verse 12, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was, how successful David was, he was afraid of him. Saul was afraid of David. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family, or my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Mahola. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, it looks like Michal or Mitchell, but I think her name is pronounced Michal, like Michelin tires, Michal. Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." Then Saul ordered his attendants, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David. But David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I am only a poor man and little known." David is not a poor man, and he is not little known. Remember, he's kind of famous. Women are creating songs about him and dancing and playing instruments in the streets. So he's not poor, and he's not, people know who he is. He's little known means no one knows who he is. So David, I don't know why, but he's just telling Saul that he doesn't want to marry one of his daughters. I think he does, because remember earlier when he was, before he killed Goliath, he asked, "What do I get, if I happen to kill him? Oh, I get a lot of money, and I get to marry the king's daughter, and my family doesn't have to pay taxes." When Saul's servant told him what David had said, Saul replied, "Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed. So before, I guess the king gave him he said, "You only have till this time to kill all of these 100 Philistines and rip off the extra skin on their penises and bring those back to me." So David did it before the allotted time. He said you only have till then. He got it done before then. So but David took his men with him and went out and killed 200, not 100, 200 Philistines, and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king. So people were very different back then. I don't know how they handled them, but they must have had tongs. You know what tongs are. You use them when you barbecue. This is that tong. Okay, here's one foreskin. 1, 2. They kept going until they reached 200. They counted them out, the full number, to the king, so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. So here I think, remember earlier when the Lord told his generals, "Do not be afraid," he meant do not hold back. I want you to totally destroy those cities. But here Saul is not like, Saul is not afraid. I think he just, when he sees David, he doesn't like him. He doesn't like him. So Saul liked him even less. Let's take a look. See if it makes sense. So the title of this is Saul's Growing Fear. So Saul is starting to dislike, like him less. Saul's growing fear of David. Saul's growing, dislike of David. Saul, in verse 12, Saul was afraid of David. So Saul started to not like David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. So when in verse 28, when Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter loved David, isn't that typical? Right? The daughter is her father's little girl. So, Michal loves him, so then Saul became still more afraid of him. So Saul started to, like him even less, and remained his enemy the rest of his days. So this is verse 30, it's the last verse. In this chapter 18, the Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name, David's name became well known. Let's keep going to 1 Samuel 19. Okay, 1 Samuel 19 is titled, the next section is titled, Saul tries to kill David. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine," that's Goliath. "The Lord won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Once more, war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing the lyre. Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. So once again, he tried to kill him by throwing the spear at David. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. So we see Saul is lying. Earlier he said David will not be put to death. He won't die, and he keeps trying to kill him. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it. So he sent spies and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, Tomorrow you'll be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He is ill." Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. Saul said to Michal, his daughter, right, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal told him, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" Okay, let's try to understand what Michal's saying. He said to me, "Let me get away. Why should I kill you?" I think what Michal is saying is, I told him to escape. I think Michal loves David so much that, it's this, "I'm you, and, you're my heart, and, I'm you, and so when she's talking, I don't know who's speaking. Like, is she speaking from her perspective or his perspective? They're like one. She like loves him so much. They're one. He said to me, she's being romantic. He said to me, and then, "Let me get away." She let him escape. "Why should I kill you?" She's saying, she's saying to her father, "Why do you want to kill him? He's my husband." But remember, she has to respect her father. He's the king, and he is still her father. So she won't phrase it like, "Why do you want to kill my husband?" She makes it sound like this. He said to me, "Let me get away. Why should I kill you?" She's asking her father, "Why do you want to kill my husband? Why do you want to kill him?" So verse 18. When David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naioth and stayed there. Word came to Saul, "David is in Naioth at Ramah." So he sent men to capture him. But when they saw a group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing there as their leader — remember, prophets are like Jedi Knights — the Spirit of God came on Saul's men. Remember, the Spirit of God will make you kind of angry. And they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "Over in Naioth at Ramah," they said. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along, prophesying, until he came to Naioth. He stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay naked all that day and all that night. This is why people say, is Saul also among the prophets? That's very odd. Remember, they're Jedi knights. And Saul, remember, he was made a prophet also. But prophets are God's special, they're Jedis, so remember, God has people. And these guys, of course, they can fight. Prophets basically have like certain abilities. They can hear God very well, right? And they could see a little more than other people, not as well as Samuel. And then they usually have something like a sixth sense or ESP, and they could fight really well, like Jedi, and they could like tell the future, kind of. Not as well as Samuel. Samuel will like see it very clearly, like on like a TV screen, but somehow they have like I know what's gonna happen. That's what prophets are like, and they sing very well. They have nice singing voices, but when they have a sense of what's going on, I guess they always just like kind of rap it. They sing and this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. They sing. So I don't know what happened here, but it must have seemed odd. Like they started to prophesy as a large group of prophets, like Jedi Knights, like maybe like 100 of them were standing there, and they're all singing and they're all prophesying, and Samuel was there too. And then when Saul's men came to fight them, they ended up not fighting them. Like they were mind controlled, and they started to like because of the Spirit of God. God came and sort of fought for Samuel and the prophets. So when they came to fight the prophets, they have to fight them in order to get David. Because remember, Saul hates David. But David sort of like ran to Samuel, like, help me, Because remember, Samuel is the top prophet. So he's like Obi-Wan Kenobi, You have to watch Star Wars, but I don't think Obi-Wan Kenobi really commands all the other Jedi like this. But he's a top prophet, and then he could like call all the prophets, and he can make them like a little army too. Like, all right, my prophets, be right there, my Jedi Knights. So I think you understand. They're like prophesying and like telling the future, right? And they're just standing there. Maybe they're ready to reach for their weapons. And then when the people come to fight them, they just end up controlled. And God is sort of there fighting for them, controlling them too. And people are like, we're going to come fight you. And then they just stop when they seem like they're under a spell. They're like prophesying too when they really can't prophesy, And then Saul comes and the same thing happens to him. And he ends up lying down on the ground and taking off his clothes and prophesying. It's like control you power with prophesying, Control you power with prophesying, and then you won't fight. And you end up like lying down, Either not fighting and standing there like a dummy, or like you like end up lying down and prophesying. Okay, thanks for listening. Those are the readings for today. Remember, keep God first. He'll take you places.